today we're going to talk about plot holes and how to fix them. Now, obviously, I can't tell you how to fix every single plot hole because each plot hole will be unique to your genre, your book type, etc. There's going to be things that I cannot possibly fathom happening that are going to happen. It's just part of writing. However, I'm going to talk to you about the most basic plot hole problems and that occur in each genre, and then we're also going to talk about some specific examples of different kinds of plot holes that are unique. If you have any ideas about other plot holes that you're worried about, or things that you've seen that you think might be a plot hole, we can talk about that too. First, though, we're going to define a plot hole. So, for plot, you've got your classic, you've got your hook, you've got your first plot point. I'm going to do the 7-point plot structure because that's personally my favorite method. And then you have your pinch point. Then you have your midpoint. Pinch point again. Second plot point. And your resolution. Now, the reason I'm drawing this up here is because this plot holes are when something is either missing, so you take a whole section out and it's just poof. And so, in other words, you're getting arcs that are like, I have my hook, then I go immediately to the pinch point. You're like, whoa, where's the first plot point? That's a problem. So that you have some things that end up stemming from that, where you skip certain plot points. However, you also have things that can happen because these two things don't quite lead to each other. For example, if there's a hook and the hook is about dragons, and then all of a sudden you're like, we're going to talk about vampires now, and the dragons never show up in the rest of the series. We have a problem. That is a big plot hole problem, because why did you even bring the dragons up? What was the point of that if you're not going to discuss them ever again? You also have the problems of you can't even do some of these unless these are well built, and vice versa. Same thing with your world building. You cannot properly do a plot if your world building isn't properly filled out. Now, to say a caveat, you cannot world build forever. It's better that you world build as much as you feel is necessary to a point. I'd probably say if you feel like you have basics for most of your important structures, leave it. The reason why is because there's always going to be hiccups that are going to show up that you aren't going to have imagined or thought of, and that's okay. Just push right past it, finish your novel, and you can fix it later. There are going to be plot holes. It's just inevitable. I have plot holes in all of my stuff. My friends have plot holes in all of their stuff. I'm in a creative writing class in the college right now, and there are plot holes in their dang plot ideas. Right now we're only doing the planning stage, and there are some times when I'm like, whoa, I'm already seeing plot holes. But that's okay. There will always be plot holes. They're inevitable.
Don't take the Brandon Sanderson road.
Yes, exactly. Don't get too Brandon Sanderson-y where you're like, I must write a whole, or also J.R.R. Tolkien, where you're like, I must write a whole Bible before I'm allowed to write the rest. No. You will almost never guaranteed get done that way unless you're secretly Brandon Sanderson, in which case, I think he's using witchcraft. I know he'd be upset if I said that, but I'm sorry. I think he's using witchcraft. There has to be some hoogada-boogada going on there, because there's no way that anyway, moving on. So, we're going to talk about the most common plot holes. Because obviously when something major has been missed, it takes us out of the stories, right? When you're in the middle of the story and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, this thing, you're like, wait, what? And there's a giant plot hole and you're just like, I'm confused. That's okay to be confused. It's perfectly normal to be confused, but that does mean you need to fix it. You don't want your readers being confused and lost. It's not generally a good idea. Alright, so we're gonna do this based on the most common genres that people write in. So we got your classic fiction, we got mystery, we got romance, we got fantasy, and we got sci-fi. Alright, so fiction. The biggest and most common plot hole that I see in fiction is that the main character is either not well-rounded, or even more commonly, there's no goals. Therefore, how can you have a plot if the character has no goals? They're just meandering over here, they're meandering over there. Woo! I don't want to read that. I don't know about you guys, but this is a very common one actually, where the main character has no goals. You have to build the character with goals. We all have goals, right? Exactly, we need goals. Like, I mean, in any book, but realistic fiction especially, because that's the whole point of the book, is them accomplishing their goal. So if you ain't got a goal, you got a problem. The biggest part of your book is missing. The reason that this is the most common one, I think, is because of the fact that people are trying so hard to make them realistic that they're like, well, they can't always be goal-oriented. That's not entirely true. People always have goals. Whether or not they're always going after them is different. For example, I always had a goal to become an editor. I wasn't constantly chasing that dream. There were definitely times where I was like, hey, maybe I want to do this, maybe I want to do that, you know, getting hiccups, setbacks, etc. You know, I had to get my degree first. But ultimately, I still had goals, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. And I think that's the problem. People are like, well, I don't think about my goals all the time. And it's like, well, yeah, but that you still have them. It's important to make sure that your character is well built and well fleshed out. So there's that for fiction. Next for mystery is no motive or weak motive. Now obviously we can see why this is a problem. Is because if you have no motive, first of all, why did they commit the crime? People don't like to just commit crimes for no reason, including psychopaths and serial killers. They generally have a rhyme and reason to their thinking. It's a psychopathic rhyme and reason, but it's still a rhyme and reason. There's still a motive. Whether or not it makes sense to our logical, normal brains is different. Just because we're not psychotic doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense to them, that it's not a good motive to them. That being said, you also have a problem if you have a weak motive. For example, a weak motive for murder would be, he stole my candy bar. Why would I murder him? Now, however, if, I actually watched a show last night that did this, if the person had a candy bar that was poisoned by you, and you didn't want anyone to catch you having put the poisoned candy bars in there, that means that the guy then had motive to want to kill the guy, because then it would look like he wasn't poisoned. He was murdered, therefore he couldn't have been poisoned. And so it was actually kind of interesting, because the guy was trying so hard not to get caught that he ended up getting caught. But that being said, it wasn't a weak motive. That was actually a very strong motive. The whole idea was, I don't want to get caught having poisoned all these candy bars, because he originally had been planning on doing it normally, and then he got caught putting the poison back on the shelf. And so his boss was like, crap, he used that poison. Anyone who gets poisoned by this, that means that it's his fault. And so the guy was like, oh shoot, if I don't get rid of all those poisoned candy bars, then everyone's going to think that I did it because I was the one who stole that kind of poison. And it's a rare kind of poison. So as a result, he killed the guy, so that way they wouldn't bother knowing that he died of poison, so that way he wouldn't get caught. It was complicated, but it wasn't weak. It made sense, ultimately. It was a diluted sort of crazy sense, but it made sense. And the reason he poisoned the candy bars also had a good motive that wasn't weak. His motive was the fact that his wife was being a total jerk to him, and he knew that she loved this particular type of candy bar. And so as a result, he poisoned her candy bar, but then obviously if he poisoned her candy bar, it would look like he killed her. So he poisoned a bunch of candy bars, so that way it would look like, oh, there's just some crazy serial killer on the loose, because it was Halloween. And then he realized, oh crap, if any of those people eat the candy, I'm gonna be in trouble because it won't look like a serial killer anymore. It'll just be my fault because they know I stole the poison. So his motives were increasingly complex. They were not weak. He definitely had a motive. He was definitely moving forward, and it made sense. That being said, mysteries, I think, oftentimes go with no motive or a weak motive, like you stole my candy bar, because of the fact that they aren't criminal masterminds themselves. And that's okay. I'm not a criminal mastermind either. But that doesn't mean that you can't think to yourself and go, hey, what would I do if X, Y, and Z happened? Or what would I do if I was absolutely crazy? Or if I wanted to do something like, I don't know, murder someone, why would I do it? Or for, another example is that in general, when it comes to motive, people have a good reason for it in their mind. Like they think that ultimately it's the best thing for them. A lot of times it's a selfish reason. And so it's important that you know that there are selfish people out there who are going to do selfish things. And you gotta take that into account when you're writing your own motives, because people are selfish, unfortunately. Alright, that being said, romance is the next one. Okay. Too quick or no reason? I'm gonna explain. With romance, there tends to be two big plot holes that are most common. The couple gets together too quickly for absolutely no purpose aside from you're attractive. Yes, this can happen in real life, but it's not a true romance novel if they're not actually in love and they're just like, you hot. It's not a romance novel. That's just two people flirting. It's just two people hitting on each other for no reason. They're not actually in love if they're just like, you're attractive, I'm attractive, let's go date. That's not a romance novel. That's just two people being people. It's not interesting. It's not something that we're like, they're going to be the end goal couple. We're just like, I guess they went on a couple dates. When it's too quick, it doesn't feel we don't feel the chemistry. We don't feel the bond. We don't feel like they've gotten together. We don't feel like they fought for this couple relationship. We just feel like, oh, I guess they're together now. It's not as rewarding and satisfying. On top of that, most people don't get together that quick. Or if they do, they then spend a lot of time getting to know each other afterwards. There are some people who like go on a blind date and are immediately like, oh my gosh, I think this might be the one. Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that they don't spend time later getting to know each other. You can absolutely have them be like, we want to get married and we want to get together and everything. And then later have them, run across problems and have them be able to work through it together and be able to still have that arc. There's actually a lot of romance novels that have that arc where they get married for whether they're in love or it's an arranged marriage, and then they have to fall in love after the more and more after the fact. They were in love before, but their love grows and matures and becomes fully developed throughout the rest of the novel. Again, this is a novel thing. If you know someone who has gotten married and was immediately in love, congratulations for that. But that's not common with a romance novel. People like it to play out. The next one is breaking up for no reason. People don't just break up for no reason, okay? They just don't. Usually there's a reason, even if it's a stupid reason. It can be a stupid reason. You just can't have no reason. Or it can't be, like we said, with the no motive or weak motive, it can't be a weak reason. And if it is a weak reason, then you gotta show that the person's a bad person. The reason I say that is because there are some people who are like, well, you're just not pretty enough or whatever, so I'm gonna dump you. Yes, and that's a weak reason, but they're also a jerk. So you gotta show that. You gotta show that they're a jerk if you're gonna do that. However, that's probably no longer a romance novel then, because they're not gonna end up together. And they shouldn't end up together if they're a jerk. So generally they have to have a good motive for breaking up, and it can't be a weak motive for breaking up. You can have a lot of things you can do. You could have it be like they were dating and then they both end up working in the same place, and they have a no dating policy in the work environment, and they love both, this is their dream job, and so they both agree like, hey, because we want to follow our dreams, let's break up. That's a good motive. It's a sad motive, but it's a good motive. Ultimately, they'll probably, figure out that they care about each other more than they do their job. That's cool. but it's a good motive. That's why. It's not a just, you're not pretty enough, or you're not smart enough, or I only date guys with purple dyed hair. Like, you can't, no. Or even, okay, there are even reasons that seem to be solid, but if you don't build it up, that's another problem. It feels like it's for no reason if you don't build it up. So, for example, we'll not name the book, but for those of you that know, you'll know. There was a book where they'd been together the whole series, and then suddenly in the 5th book, he was like, I'm super worried that you're gonna die or be in danger, so I'm gonna break up with you. And it's like, dude, you've been dating for 5 books, and in every book she's almost died, and now you're worried? Now you're worried. After 5 books of her almost dying, now you're worried. It was a terrible motivation. It was ultimately, why would he be thinking that? There was no build-up. It was just suddenly, now I'm going to be angsty and break up with you because I think it's for your own good. And it's like, why didn't you do that 7 books ago? Well, 3. But anyway, why didn't you do that 3 books ago when she almost got kidnapped and died? That doesn't make sense. If she's getting kidnapped and is about ready to die, you generally think that's the thing. If you're like, it's my fault that she got kidnapped and almost died, then yeah, break up with her. But that should have been 3 books ago. Not 5 books later when you've been through so much and almost died 5 times. By that point, you're in it to win it, man. You've not thought about the consequences of dating her and putting her in danger this long. No, not a good enough reason. But if they built it up and said something like, I've lost this, I've lost this, I've lost this, I've lost this, I can't lose you too, that would have been better. But just saying, hey, I'm putting you in danger, therefore I can't be with you. And then the worst part was it only lasted like 7 chapters, their little breakup. He was like, I'm going to go be angsty and chop wood in the woods. Oh, all the angst, I'm so angsty. I'm so sad. And then all of a sudden, 3 chapters later, they're like, I'm too sad. I can't be broken up with you. Let's get back together. And I'm like, what was even the point? Why did we even have those 5 chapters? There was no reason for it. If they were just going to get back together 5 chapters later, why did we even bother? So, yeah, breaking up for no reason. Most common thing in romance. That wasn't even a romance, but the romance subplot was just, well, if you can't tell, it's awful. Ah, hello. It is you. Hello.
I'm not alone
Good to see you.
again.
Hello. All right. Fantasy. Let's see. Where is it? Ah, here we go. Boop, 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 boop. Biggest problem with fantasy plot holes is always this. This is always the culprit. It is always magic. Your magic is going to screw you up. It's just going to happen. Doesn't matter how much plot building you do, it is going to mess you up. And your poor editor's going to go, this is a problem. And you're going to go, oh no! And it's going to happen. It's just going to happen. It's inevitable. It really is. Like, any good magic system is going to have flaws at first, and you're going to have to iron it out. You're going to have to smooth it out. It's just part of the thing. So, hold on. Burp. Come on, can't quite see that. All right. So typically with this, a critical piece of magic building is either missed, and therefore the plot works. So you have to rewrite the book because you're like, hey, I said only people with blue hair could do magic, and now I have a brown-haired person doing magic, and therefore the book works. And it's like, but you didn't explain why. Now you have to either rewrite the whole book with him with blue hair, or you have to explain why it works.
Because he died
Problems.
because he wanted to keep the magic secret.
There you go. See, you gotta have reasons. There are sometimes easy fixes for what you run into, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that it's not something that you
And
could
then
have avoided.
Sometimes you have to rewrite like an entire section of your
Entire sections, yes.
magic rulebook.
It's fun.
Because the magic was grumpy on that day and decided to give every blue person with blue hair
Yep.
or not magic and give it to
Yep.
that person.
Or alternatively, you say at the end of, or alternatively you say, by the end of the book, if they don't break this magical crystal and get rid of magic forever, then it's going to explode. And then all of a sudden they're like, we didn't break the crystal and it didn't explode. Turns out it was a hoax. What? I'm just sad now. When you're solving your problems with Deus Ex Machina, you know you've probably come across a plot hole somewhere. Because you shouldn't have to fix it with Deus Ex Machina unless you have plot holes. The plot holes generally occur because, the Deus Ex Machina generally occurs because you have plot holes. Alright. Last thing. Science fiction. Alright. The main problem with science fiction is science. It's like fantasy. Fantasy, the main problem is magic. Sci-fi, the main problem is science. Unfortunately, with these two genres, you end up, the thing that makes it cool is also the thing that makes it really hard to write. With science fiction, the main problems are your plot hinges on a key piece of scientific theory that is either false or, based on current scientific knowledge, not possible. Or you go too in-depth into your scientific theory and all of your scientific mumbo-jumbo is just not correct. However, you can get around this pretty dang easily by just doing what Ray Bradbury does, where he'll say things like, yeah, he had earbuds, like Bluetooth earbuds, but he didn't explain how they worked, because he didn't know. He was just like, yeah, I think that people will have these things called, he called them seashells, so not Bluetooth, but he was like, yeah, I think they'll have these things called seashells, and they'll sit in the ears right here, and they can hear the radio and stuff like that. And it works because he didn't say, and it works by magnetic and that's all not correct. So the reason it works is actually because he didn't give us a lot of detail. He made it seem almost like magic, but we know, oh, yeah, we'll probably just figure that out later. Scientific stuff. And that's okay. You don't always have to use scientific theories to explain your science, but if you do, make sure you do your research. And you're not saying, yes, these trees get their nutrients through the soil and the sun is not involved.
That's
Sorry?
very wrong.
The sun is involved. It will always be involved. Exactly. You need to make sure that whatever your scientific theory is, the science works as of currently. That being said, we're going to talk about a bunch of different plot hole types. Ways to get rid of these problems. So I know we talked about these in specific, but we're going to talk about in general how to avoid plot holes, both in post and fixing them. All right. So this is the biggest one, especially for science fiction and fantasy, as you know. World building.
Oh my god.
If you do not do any world building or do minimal world building, you're going to have increased likelihood of plot holes. Even if you do world building, even if you have done world building, you're still going to have plot holes. This is the one I'm actually going to mention. There was this lovely young girl. I highly recommend you read her book. It's called Meeting Twilight. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to try to not do this with any spoilers, but basically at some point they have to make a potion. And they leave it out in the woods, and then later they say they covered up the potion. And I was like, why wouldn't they have covered it before? If a single leaf fell in this pot, it would screw up the potion, right? And she was like, oh, right, shoot. This was a big plot hole where it was like, oh no, now what do I do? Like, it's a big problem in her world building magic system that she said that if anything was added to this potion, it would go wrong, and yet there was the possibility that a leaf could fall in this pot, and I was going, this is kind of a plot hole here. This could be a problem, especially since they got it from an advanced potion making book. Generally, those kind of potions explode in your face if you screw them up. And so finally, what she actually fixed it in a really creative way, and she said, if the potion doesn't cure in the sun for 3 days, it won't work either. So they had to leave the lid off the pot and risk having the leaves fall in, because if they didn't, then it wouldn't cure in the sun properly. And I was like, there you go. There are lots of unique and original ways to fix things with your world building, like you said with the dyeing the hair thing, that are very simple. You don't have to make it complicated. You don't have to rewrite your whole novel. She rewrote 2 sentences, and it flowed so much better and perfectly. It just worked. So with world building, make sure you just don't do too much. That is one thing I will say. World builder's disease is very real, where you will build the world for 7 years and then you finally write the novel. Please don't. You're going to have problems anyway. Even if you do spend 7 years world building, you will come up with a world building problem in your novel. It's just going to happen. It's going to happen. that being said, don't underbuild it, but don't overbuild it. I would say spend at maximum 3 months. That's the absolute maximum. I would actually recommend more like 1 month to 2 weeks building your world. Now, obviously, the reason I'm giving these types of timelines is because obviously you can't spend 24/7, 365 days a week building your world. So I'm like, you whenever you can in your spare time, build your world, but don't go crazy. Don't spend forever. The reason why is because ultimately you want to get to the writing part. It's important that you get to the writing part, otherwise it will never get written, and we can't read a story that's not written, no matter how cool it is. So, with world building, this is the best way to fix a plot hole, but keep in mind, it's also the best way to not get a book written. So, balance. Balance in all things. Alright, next one. Characters. Make them real people with real motivations and real thoughts and feelings. You wouldn't have your character, for instance, have this person that they're super hardcore crushing on, and they've asked them, like, do you like me? And they're like, yes, I like you. And then they start dating someone else. Understandably, you'd be upset, right? You wouldn't just be like, oh, I forgive you. No, you're upset. You're upset. You're like, you said you liked me, and then you went and dated someone else behind my back. I'm upset. You don't just blow that kind of stuff off and just be like, whatever. And if you do, then this is where it comes back. Then you're a robot. Or if your real character does this, you've got to explain why. For example, maybe they're naive. Maybe they're like Rapunzel, where they've never left the house, and so they're like, maybe this is just normal for people. That's a thing that could work, but you gotta have a reason that makes sense. You can't just have no reason for what they do. Characters are people too. I know that sounds crazy because they're fictional, but characters are people too.
Well, actually, in my English class, we were doing like a stereotypes thing, and there was like these groups, like, what group of this like selection do you belong to? And we were like, here's a stereotype. Here's what actually happens. And in part of the explanation, like, in reality, this is how we act. Like, yeah, no, we just, like, see the characters in our head, call us schizophrenic, but, like, they're alive.
No, it's true. They're real people. They're real people to us. And that's a great mention about stereotypes, too. You can have them fit within a stereotype, but make sure that you actually have met someone from that stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you haven't met someone from that stereotype, you are going to extra stereotype them. It's okay to do a little bit of stereotyping. There's a reason those stereotypes exist. Like, it's a thing. I've met cheerleaders that are bubbly and giggly. Yes, I have. Granted, I've also met cheerleaders that are like, I couldn't care less about makeup unless I'm in competition. So it's like, there's diversity in all things, but the reason we see that stereotype is because often the bubbly, giggly ones are the ones that get the most press, the most popularity, right? So it's not to say that you can't do those things. You can have your cheerleader character be bubbly and giggly, but just make sure she has other emotions too. Make sure that's not her singular emotion. All right.
Make her angry at someone.
Exactly. Make her angry. Make her boyfriend get upset at her, and she slaps him, and you go, yeah! Like, come on, you gotta have these moments where they feel real. They feel like people. All right. Next one is not the favorite of most authors, but nonetheless it is important. Research. Now, that being said, you don't necessarily have to do this, for example, if you're building your own fantasy world, but your form of research is going to be world building. So, think of research for fantasy as world building. You're researching your own universe. You're sitting in a library at your fantasy universe and going, haha, must read history. That's your form of research. However, if you're doing science fiction, or if you're doing historical fiction, or if you're even doing romance, I would say do research, especially if you haven't experienced something. So, for example, if you're doing a romance subplot and you've never even kind of sort of had a crush or fallen in love, definitely read some romance books. Definitely think.
Crush, though.
I mean,
Right? Like, even just a small one.
I mean, there are lots of people who are asexual out there.
That's true.
So, like, that's what I was more referring to.
But also, let's go admit, some characters in TV shows are just hot.
I'm just trying to be all inclusive. But you're not wrong. There are some people who feel that way for sure. That being said, with your research, make sure that whatever you're going to write about, read from that genre. So, for example, If you're writing romance, read a lot of romance. If you're going to write a historical fiction, make sure you read historical fictions about that time period. Make sure you do some research on what happened during this time period. Maybe I could have a scene from X, Y, and Z that no one's done before. Make sure that you know all the facts, even if you're making it fantasy. I've actually done this before where I've done a lot of research on historical events and explained them using fantasy. And this research really came in handy because I was able to say X, Y, and Z happened that led to X, Y, and Z, but no one knows the cause, therefore, poof, I insert magic for the cause.
You see, Parliament was just like a bunch of like dark elves.
Parliament was a bunch of dark elves. I love it. So exactly, it has these things that you can just insert magic here. A lot of history actually has that. It's kind of scary. It makes you wonder if magic does exist. But anyway, that being said, make sure you do your research, irregardless of your genre. It's going to be important because it's going to help prevent those plot holes. Like, guess what? For example, someone said the other day, like, Churchill wasn't knighted until X year. And I was like, well, if you didn't know that Churchill wasn't knighted until X year, you could totally say Sir Churchill, and that would be wrong. So those kinds of things matter to people. So make sure you do your research. All right, last one. This is a post thing. This is not a pre thing. Rebuild and rework. You're going to have plot holes. Unfortunately, it's true. No matter if you follow every single step that I just talked about to a T, plus extra, with fancy toppings and a cherry on top, like you're gonna have problems. It's going to happen. That's why ultimately, if you're feeling writer's block because it's not perfect, keep going, because it ain't ever gonna be perfect. Even after an editor goes over it, there's gonna be that one typo. It actually is one of my favorite memes right now. May God bless me with the strength of a typo that has survived 35 rounds of editing. And I'm like, it happens. Legitimately, it happens.
Yeah.
Like, it's a thing that happens. Like, editors are people too. It's going to be a problem. You'll have like 30 beta readers and 5 ARC readers and an editor and another editor and a proofreader, and it'll still get missed. It's going to happen. Like, it's just,
The one sentence I missed is the last sentence of the whole story.
But even then, like, I mean, even not in the story either, it's just basic things. Like, there was a lady who admitted she's from Shadow Mountain Publishing. Anyone familiar with that? Fablehaven, seeing the book right there? Yep, that's them. They're famous for a reason, because they do a really good job. But the editor from there actually admitted that she published a cozy mystery once, and the lady had very bravely made their blackberry pie recipe that was on the back of the cover, and it had 4 cups of salt. No! Exactly. That is clearly not what they meant. But the typo had somehow missed
Almost the salty
everyone. And so it happens. Like, it happens. You're going to have mistakes. You're going to have problems. So much so. I loved it too, where she was like, the lady was so polite in her letter saying, like, I think something was wrong with the pie. And she's like, you only think something was wrong with the pie. Like, you're so nice. You're too nice to me. But with that being said, make sure that you know you're going to have to rebuild, you're going to have to rework, even if it's just a sentence saying, hey, here's what happened. You're going to have to fix some things or add some things, or like the one I'm working on currently, she didn't know the guy's identity, and now all of a sudden she was like, I know your identity, and I was like, you never acknowledged that she figured it out. So she just needs a sentence or two about, whoa, wait, what? And then she'll be fine. So a lot of the times it's a simple rework, it's not a massive rework, but there are sometimes when certain plot holes involve 7 or 8 chapters of rewrite.
That's all I have.
It's going to happen.
Characters that like 30 times.
It's
Lots
going
was
to
like a
happen.
fake, though.
It's going to happen. You're going to have rewrites and problems, but that's why rebuilding and reworking is important. This is why editors are important, because they're supposed to, most of the time, get to those sort of things. And with rebuilding and reworking, just don't be too hard on yourself. If your editor says, hey, everything's great, but you have to rework these 4 chapters due to a plot hole, don't be upset. Doesn't mean your novel sucks. It just means you're normal.
It means that you should burn your novel to the ground. and
No,
never
absolutely
again.
not. That is the opposite message I'm trying to send here. It just means that you're normal. It means that you have an average writing experience. Most writers, I don't think I've met a single writer that hasn't had at least one plot hole. One plot hole. I'm an editor for a living, and I've
I'm like
found at least
5.
one or 2 plot holes. I think there's only one that I found. It was a minor plot hole, so I wasn't even sure if it counted, but it would help smooth things over. Like, ultimately, there are some people who can avoid it, but most of the time, you're gonna have at least 1, maybe 2, or 3.
Or 100.
Or 100. Who knows? But that's okay. That doesn't mean your book sucks.
Or it's like a bug in a code. You fix 1 and then you have 103.
Oh my god. Yeah, no, I feel that.
All right. So, any questions about specific plot holes or specific things you've run into? I know you mentioned that one thing. Do you want me to
Sure.
talk about that? Okay. So we were talking about point of view switching. And how that can cause plot holes. So with point of view switching, the main problem that you're going to run into is you don't want to point of view switch and skip details. Unless it's a murder mystery, in which case you don't want to reveal the murderer. But even then, you want to make sure that you're not like, and guess what? He's about to kill her and...
Switch.
No.
Switch
No.
to 5 years later.
Not a
Switch to
good-
5 years later, after the murder has happened, they found out who it is, and they tell the whole world.
They waited 5 years.
Right, and you're like, what?
I feel like finding out a murder would take less than 5 years.
Well, sometimes it depends on the cold, if it's a cold case or not.
That's true.
But anyway, that being said, murder mystery is an entirely different thing. But my point is that when you're point of view skipping, you can do that. Like, I've seen plenty of things that point of view skip where it's like, and the person got murdered, and then they walk away, and you don't know who they are. All you know is that you know what happened, but now they have to discover what happened and explain it. You know, that's a thing. But the reason why it doesn't work if you skip around too much is because of the fact that if you skip around too much, fly, to the point where you don't know who's talking when, what's happening, and you're missing all the important parts. Like, this person is in the middle of fighting for their life. They have a sword above their head. They're barely managing to keep it away from their face, and then all of a sudden you're like, boom! 4 hours later, he's fine. I'm
No,
sad
I
now.
hate what?
I'm sad now.
Why?
I
This
missed
was
the
4
whole
hours.
point.
That's depressing.
Exactly. You
4
don't.
hours later, we want a good fight scene.
Exactly. We want a good fight scene. We don't want to miss the action. We don't want to miss the details. If the only time it is acceptable to point of view skip and time skip in a way that skips details is if the details do not matter to the plot.
Like walking home. from
Like
school.
walking home from school. Exactly. If you want to have your 2 characters walk home from school because it's a realistic fiction novel, by all means have them walk home from school and just skip that. Just go. They started walking home and now they're home. That's fine. But if they found a freaking murder weapon and a dead body on their walk home, you probably want to cover that.
Oh,
No, 7 years later, just like, oh wait, remember that
One time that we found a dead body on the walk home, like, no, you cover that crap. You make sure that you cover that. You definitely have a scene about that. If it's important to the plot, you want to have a scene about it. That's basically what I have to say about point of view skip and time skip. Make sure that if you're going to point of view skip and time skip, you don't skip plot pivotal information.
Unless it's like a romance, then it's like just like they're deciding.
Then none of the plot is pivotal. I'm kidding. It's a joke.
I was like so confused there for a minute. I was like, what? No, yeah, you're all good. With that, even then, I would say you're only going to want to skip scenes that are like not them being together or going to be together, or scenes that don't involve their relationship. Like if their relationship hinges on the fact that this guy is trying to say get married or else I'm going to, I don't know, take all your money. I don't
Murder
know.
your mom.
I don't know, murder your mom or something. Like, you have to marry this guy and steal all his money. And she's like, but I don't want to steal all his money. I love him. And they're like, too bad. Yeah, there's got to be some sort of motive, some sort of reason. If that matters to the romance, then absolutely have a scene about that. But if it's not, if it doesn't matter, and you're just having this cute, fluffy romance,
Like them kissing for 7 years in a row.
I don't
Okay,
think you
please
need
no.
that. I don't think you need that. Exactly. That's not plot pivotal. That's not. Typically, you want a
It
lot more
doesn't even make
emotional
sense.
buildup.
It really doesn't.
Not unless they're like some some sort of crazy immortals trying to set a million-year world record. All right, even then. That's
the
still
dumbest world
interesting.
record.
Yeah, I agree. But that being said, this is why plot points, you need to make sure you consider it. Is it in that 7-point plot structure we talked about at the beginning? If it is, and if you can't get from point A to point B in the 7-point plot structure without it, cover it. If you can get from point A to point B in the plot structure without it, don't cover it. Generally, that's a good way to go.
Yeah, no, at the beginning, there's like there's like this one like small.
Anyway.
detail, and then you skip it, and then like it turns out.
Yep.
that
If it
that's
turns out those are more important later, it's going to be frustrating. Any other plot hole questions about how to fix plot holes, about what plot holes might occur, about plot holes you might run into?
How come you're just bad and you miss like
That's not called being bad. That's called being normal. You're going to have plot holes, and people are going to point them out later.
It's called like having the story, like you know what's happening in your head, but when you try to write it, you miss something.
Yep.
It's happened
Details
to me
get missed.
all the
It
time.
happens. It just does. There have been lots of times where I've talked to someone as an editor and been like, "You missed this," and they're like, "Wait, what? I swear I wrote that." Reads the whole thing again. I did. Where is it? Like, I get it. I have had those moments even as a writer myself, where people are like, "I missed it," and I was like, "No, I didn't." And then I reread the whole thing, and I'm like, "Yeah, I did."
Yeah, no, it happens.
It happens.
Annoying, but it
Exactly.
happens.
That's why I said plot holes are going to happen, because they are. If you're a normal person and not a robot or a fairy or immortal or something crazy like that, you're probably going to have a plot
Little
hole.
did you know I'm actually an alien.
If you're probably going to experience plot holes. Alright, that being said, if you guys have any other questions about plot holes or personal, like, hey, I think this might be a plot hole, let's talk about it, I'd be happy to edit your work. I'd be happy to look over your stuff. I will say I'm going to be a little bit slow about it because I have a lot going on right now. But I'd be more than happy to answer questions during Writers Club as of right now. And, well, seems like we're good, so
Yeah.
I'm going to say thank
I
you.
feel like 2 days ago I would have had a question, but I like.
I know, right? We already covered that. We already covered that.
Hands on Brandon Sanderson's unedited books and finds no plot holes.
Oh man, we would find the biggest plot holes, the most immense plot holes.
He's like,
Either that or we'd find the opposite of plot holes. There's actually one where I can't remember if it was him. I think it was him, yeah. He was talking in his podcast about the fact that he had this guy that was like the most funny guy ever in one of his series. I can't remember which one it was. But apparently he was hilarious. And he loved him, and he was his favorite character. And the editor was like, he too is my favorite character, but he also has no purpose to the plot. Delete him. And Brandon Sanderson was like, no!
Yeah, no, that's- no,
it was
that's
the
the kind of
opposite.
plot hole feature.
Yes, exactly, the opposite of a plot hole almost, where he adds so much that he actually has to delete people in order to have the plot make sense.
Yeah, that's Brandon Sanderson for you.
That is still a plot hole, it's just a reverse plot hole, where instead you're like,
it's a plot mound.
it's a plot
It's
mound.
a speed bump.
Exactly, it's a speed bump where you're like, we
It's a
really
speed
didn't
bump
need
that
the
you're
speed
going over
bump.
at 5 million miles an hour.
Exactly. you're
It's
like,
a freeway. We don't need speed bumps.
Exactly. It's a freeway. We don't need a speed bump. Thank you, Brandon Sanderson. He's like, but I like the speed bump.
But it's so pretty as a flower on it.
And it's like, sorry, Brandon. Your little plot mound has to go. All right. That being said, thank you guys for coming. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I'm gonna turn off the video now.
Bye.
If it'll button.